Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Trade with Conviction. I'm Felipe Elling Sherman, and today I'm joined by Neil, Jorge, and Phil. Guys, hi, how are you?
Hi, Felipe. All good here.
We're trying to keep up.
Trying to keep up, indeed. Indeed, there's just a flurry of news, and it's clearly not de-escalating. No off-ramp seen. The more I talk to people, the more it's like, oh, this is too big to fail. This is too big to fail. Last week I wrote a piece and saying that this could last until April or even May, and a lot of people call me crazy, and I still think it's crazy. But every week we see that it keeps going. So. Well, let's look at Neil. Let's start with a summary of what's going on. What are the obviously we saw an escalation yesterday. Drive us through that process.
Yeah, I mean, we were going to do a segment on why flat price wasn't rising. That was before yesterday happened, right? So I think we could just scrap that now because now we're at 115. The main driver was the attack on South Pars, and really the whole thing was about the level of escalation. Right, how quickly this thing escalated. The Israelis attacked South Pars. The Iranians then went out and said, we've got this list of targets and we're going to do it today. And they went out and hit some of them, including Ras Laffan, including some refineries. And that's just a very, how do you want to call it? Like a very nasty picture. It just tells us how fast this thing could actually go out of control if various sides would like it to. And you actually saw Trump yesterday trying to row back on it. He basically kind of said, I'm going to rein the Israelis in. But by the way, if the Iranians attack again, we're going to bomb them to oblivion. So it's kind of a de-escalation, but kind of not. And that has us all thinking, what's the next step from the Iranians? What's the next step from the US? Yesterday, there was more and more chat around two things, one of which we'll go into later, but one of them was US boots on the ground on Karg Island. What the Iranians would do under that circumstance, right? So if you kind of cut off their oil money, what are the Iranians going to do next? And from the US side, because you can have a big argument about who's under more pressure now, Trump or the Iranians. And from Trump's side, he's already done Jones Act, which Phil, you're going to talk about. And what's next? What's next? Is he going to do an export ban? And we'll talk about this in the coming 30 minutes, and we can already see the effect of the market expectation about export bans. So very wild days.
So yes, I agree, Neil. Trump has been trying to calm things down, both between Israel and Iran, trying to avoid more attacks on infrastructure as well as Jones Act. Phil, maybe you can tell us a bit more about the Jones Act and what is the implication? What does it mean?
Yeah. So yesterday became clear that there was a 60-day waiver on the Jones Act. Previously, there'd been rumors that maybe it would be 30 days, maybe it would just be crude. But no, it's all products and 60 days. When we looked into kind of actually what the cent per gallon impact is on therefore landed prices, it's not actually that dramatic. But I suppose if you're in a market that's so backwardated and panicked to a certain extent, every day counts in shortening journey times. So if you can bypass FORCO, you're bringing the freight prices down a little bit and you're able to just move more volumes. In terms of freight rates, not such a huge impact, but in terms of potential volume and the speed with which you can therefore get products from the Gulf Coast to either PAD 1 or PAD 5, it is helpful. From what we've seen, it looks like realistically distillates should see the largest impact. So PAD 1 and PAD 5 distillate premiums were already very elevated, and we should see these flows being economically viable and helping to boost volumes on those routes now. So overall, if we just kind of look at what impact that should have on the various kind of tradable instruments, it should be bullish TC14. So obviously we're taking non-US flag vessels out of running other routes potentially, and therefore also bearish on the HOGO. We had expected the impact on things like the TARB, on jet and on crude all to be relatively minor.
Yeah, but we actually saw that WTI-Brent blew out to, I think it's above $10 a barrel, and the TAR moved quite dramatically. You know why?
Jorge, Neil, chime in, but I don't think the market is pricing just Jones Act waivers here, right? This is very much seen as this is your first slightly softer step to try and bring down retail prices or control the price at the pump for American consumers. But it's going to be quite clear that is a small sticking plaster and that actually the next thing that we're already talking about is things like export bans or waiving summer spec requirements on gasoline. I think as and when this ultimately or inevitably fails to bring down pump prices in the next few days and the political cost is getting higher and higher, market just becomes more and more wary of these harder measures that are going to be coming.
Yeah, I think you're right. Jones Act could be the first measure of more to come, and the market is already pricing that on the WTI-Brent spread and also on TI.
Yeah, so let's pick this up then. So TI-Brent is actually now minus $15, $16 per barrel this morning. Absolutely insane and way beyond what let's say the freight would suggest it needs to be, because obviously TI-Brent and TD25 are very connected. And now we have to start thinking about those scenarios, unfortunately. So TI-Brent is one thing, TAR was another. The thing is, it's going to depend on exactly what it is, because there's many options. Is it going to be crude? Is it going to be crude and products? Is it going to be products? Is it going to be a full ban, or might it be some kind of limit? Because actually South Korea is now planning to do a cap on exports, right? So it could be many variations. And for TI-Brent, it's difficult to tell exactly what's being priced, because of course, if you limit product exports, you're automatically going to make the margin very much worse for the US refiners, and they may end up cutting runs, and then they have to export more domestic crude, right? So it becomes very tricky.
You get into the argument of, okay, if you ban product exports but not crude exports, then you would have a pretty big political backlash domestically saying, well, we're just moving our SPR into China's SPR, basically. So, what are you really doing on that? And I think it's going to be a politically difficult kind of question to navigate, probably.
Well, speaking about difficulty, like what if you do limit US crude exports, right? What happens to the share price of all the US upstream companies? Like, it's going to collapse overnight. So, like, that's also very politically difficult, right? I see the crude ban is less likely somehow, because it's just so catastrophic. Maybe a sort of a tapering of exports is the most likely scenario just now, and maybe that could explain.
If you did end up with kind of a similar situation to what you're seeing in South Korea, with we're going to limit exports to say 90% of 2025 levels, for example, that is also in the current scenario very bullish for global product and crude, because we've been talking the last few days about how in this scenario where you've got not enough crude and not enough refining going on in Asia, the Gulf Coast has become probably the most important supplier of both marginal crude and clean products into Asia and into Europe. And so even if you're just capping exports at the levels that you maybe had last year or somewhere around that, that's not allowing the market to get out those extra barrels that it needs right now.
To me, this sounds like a very bad idea. Let's, if you just look at this on a macro perspective, the US as a whole is benefiting from this. They I'm not saying, the different groups, some people make more, some people make less, but as a whole, as a country, they're making money out of this situation, whether it's on LNG, on oil, etc. Now, the problem is that, you have big winners, the LNG producers, the shale producers, all of these, the Exxons of this world. And you have big losers, the consumer, agriculture, and all that. So the voters. So economically, it's actually positive. Politically, it's very negative because, $5 per gallon, and that's the headline right now. There are ways of doing this. For example, in France, Total has a capped price. Only Total has a capped price of €2 per liter. Everyone else can go higher, but Total is capped. Why? Because there's sort of this agreement between Total and the government that, okay, you're losing money now, but I will give you money some way or another. And that to me sounds like the most astute way of looking at this, is saying, look, all of the gas stations, hey, you cap your prices, you will lose money, but I will compensate you in one way or another. But as so you're redistributing that wealth that the government or the country is getting in a different way. I think that would be the smartest way of doing it, rather than capping exports or anything like that, and not benefiting as a country.
Yeah. One of the kind of levers that has been mentioned and can still be pulled would be having summer spec not be as tight. So RBOB summer spec not be as tight as it normally would be, allowing more of that butane, for example, into the blend. Our blender, Gulf Coast blender difference between an F1 and an F5 F4, blend cost at the moment is something like 30 cents per gallon. In reality, it wouldn't be that wide because as you're bringing those cheaper, winter spec components in, they would obviously rise. But maybe you could get another 15 cents per gallon on the wholesale price from that kind of spec waiver, and then you're talking about federal and state level taxes, which can be waived as well for a period.
So obviously you can compound multiple little ideas and all of that helps, or you just redistribute the wealth. That is the situation. But I don't know, I just find it crazy that the US would find itself in a position to export bans. I just don't see that happening.
Well, the market's trading something funny then. So if we agree that this is this stupid idea, then WTI-Brent of -20 now, I just checked, that has to snap back at some stage, right? Right. There's something amiss here between what the market perceives and what might be sensible.
Yeah, that to me is a trade opportunity. Yeah,
I wouldn't want to trade it, but
I mean, they're connected. You can buy TI, send it to the arbs open. Just connect the two dots and that's it. Go long freight and connect the two dots and make money. Sometimes the when we see something that is too good to be true, then it's just because it is too good to be true, and it will correct.
Yeah, I hope so. Although it's dependent on Trump making sensible decisions, so it's perhaps like the most risky trade.
Anything else on Jones Act or US bans or anything else, or should we move on to Red Sea?
No, let's do the other solvers, right? So I just wanted a quick update on Yambu, for example. So the word earlier this week was that we might have already reached over 3 million barrels per day of crude loadings at Yambu, which would be quite good. The market wanted 4. I've heard of 4 for a few days from some trackers, but 5 is, the max, and people are kind of expecting 5 to a certain degree, but it's still the excited reach. And the other thing is, talking of escalation, obviously on Twitter, we can see that there's NASA satellite images showing that there are parts of the Yambu terminal on fire this morning. So the risk of escalation, even at Yambu, has not gone away. And obviously, one of the key questions that everybody's talking about is, when will the Houthis get involved? What do the Iranians do in Yambu? So that will be another step higher on price if it turns out that Yambu is no longer a viable option.
That seems to be the political drive here. It's just keep on escalating, and they're in deadlock right now. So who's going to be first? It's
well, as well, I keep coming back to who's actually winning this thing from a PR and macroeconomic pain perspective. It's the Iranians just now, and everybody's talking about how much longer can they do this, and if it turns out it can be a lot longer than some people expect, then the Iranians are almost winning this.
And we didn't actually talk about this because now there's so many news that 3 days ago is old news, no? But let's not forget that over the weekend or on Monday, Japan, UK, Europe, Australia, everyone said thanks, but no thanks. We're not participating in this war. You did not call us. You didn't warn us. Which, it's, I can understand the argument, but at the same time, it is surprising because they are the most impacted by it. At the end of the day, they're not benefiting from this as a whole, but they basically said no. And probably for political reasons, in the sense that, the political backlash internally, why are you participating in this war, etc. So that makes sense. So there's no, off ramp. We keep seeing more of an escalation and less of an off ramp until of course one day there's the off ramp, and then everything collapses. The asymmetry. The more the prices go up, the more the asymmetry when the price, when something is sold, how it will collapse very quickly, and that's something people tend to forget. When you're starting to be bull and you start buying and going long and all that, then you sometimes forget that this can stop tomorrow. And the more we go up today, the more it will drop tomorrow, and that's something to remember as well.
And it must feed through to what hedge funds are prepared to do at the moment, in terms of the risk you want to put on. But the worse this gets, the bigger the pressure of let's say, just call it the taco or whatever, the bigger the pressure to find an off ramp and the more at risk you are, right? So you'd want to be long less and less the higher this price goes, I suppose, or directly exposed.
For prices, let's talk about the price action today. Jorge, you want to start with light ends and tell us what's going on and what do you think will happen?
Yeah, on a quick summary about the pricing movements. First, we have FizzWest. We keep seeing the same trend, new historical highs for April. So the market keeps pricing this need of a resupply with product from the West. And then we have the TAR. We have already talked a little bit about this, but it has collapsed, and we have three main reasons. So the first one would be Jones Act. As Phil has already said, the impact of this is not very big on gasoline, much higher on distillates, and it could be higher, especially if you look at the stocks, the path 3 to path 5 rather than the path 3 to path 1. But then we have potential new measures that the market is pricing. So the first one would be the export ban. We have already talked about this. And then one, especially for gasoline, so it would be a waiver for the summer specs. So the specs should change the 28th of April. So maybe we could see some relax on the summer quality grade, and this could impact also the TAR and the arbs prices. So this has been the main changes on prices. If we look at the arbs, we are already seeing weird arbs that we were not seeing before the start of the war. We have been talking about this during the last weeks. We have talked about East Africa. We have talked about Pakistan. Right now, we have seen a fixture of Houston going to Australia, which is not typical arb. That is mainly into the money because of the rally in the East-West. And if we look at our tool for arbitrage calculations, we are seeing ARA and Houston barrels cheaper into Australia than Singapore, which is something very not really typical. And then ARA is being competitive into Indonesia, at least on the paper. We will see if this kind of trades keeps going. But we are seeing this.
The floor. We discussed this. I remember, I think it was last week when we talked about East-West on gasoline, and we were saying, remember you and I had a debate about, is this it's done the job, or, is East-West is now high enough and all that. The reality is that East-West is not high until you basically have an arb landing in Singapore.
Yeah, exactly.
Once you have that, then you can officially say everything else is contributing to, let's say, the supply and demand efforts. But on a pure pricing perspective, until you don't hit the pricing center, you're still, that still has legs to go. Now, if you're telling me, and Indonesia by proxy is Singapore, it's the same thing, because most of Singapore barrels end up in Indonesia. But that is where you start saying, okay, we've reached the limit of East-West here.
Exactly, because last week we talked about outlets that can switch. Well, not Pakistan, but East Africa can switch sometimes to Europe. But right now we are talking about like proper pricing hubs for Singapore 92. So that's what is more relevant. Yeah,
fascinating.
Yeah, I suppose given all of this, then if we say kind of East-West is now at these very, very high levels, these arbs should be workable into basically everywhere in the East. Why are we not seeing EBOB rallying in the same way? Right. Obviously, the April-May spread is at +50, so maybe it sounds odd that I'm saying that EBOB's not particularly strong, but the April-May crack roll is actually in contango right now, for whatever that's worth in this market, and we haven't really seen anything on component premiums, right? Actually, gas nap today, gas nap's at 140, down from about 170. So April gas nap, EBOB's being kind of left behind at the moment, and I'm just kind of wondering why that is.
What about the Q3 crack or Q3 spreads on gasoline in Europe?
Yeah, I think on the paper we have seen it. The cracks and the spread have rallied, but you are right, Phil, that we are missing still an answer on the component side. So I think on the paper we are kind of feeling it in Europe, but I think right now there is a mismatch between what we are seeing on the paper of the GRs from ARA and what we are seeing in the physical reality.
Yeah, no, that should pay catch up. What we're seeing last week is that in Asia, obviously the paper market was exploding, spreads, cracks, everything, but the physical was actually still going up. So that basically is telling you that physical is pulling this paper market to react, which is then having an impact on the European paper market, where you're essentially now opening arbs and all that. And now, again, paper, when you're talking about arbs and things like that, paper generally opens before the physical. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing a ramp up of physical premiums in the short term. So that should happen. I mean, it's logical, I would say. It's just, I'm not saying that, there's a mismatch, something is wrong. It's actually, to a certain extent, from what you're telling me, it sounds logical. Now, what's interesting is then you're starting on, we were supposed to start the summer season with ample supply. It was like, full of stocks. We were in contango or things like that. And now I'm very interested in these Q3 cracks and spreads, because if I didn't look at it recently, but they were quite cheap. and you're probably going to end up in a very tight physical market in Q3 with, let's not forget, always the hurricane optionality. So very interesting to keep an eye on that.
Yeah. And linking it to European physical market, right now we have talked about the collapse in TAR. This can be another reason because ARA has been really cheap into many destinations, but right now with the collapse of the TAR, Houston is becoming the cheapest source of supply into the Atlantic basin. At the same time, we have the export ban that could happen, but if it does not happen, with the collapse of TAR, Houston is stealing some outlets from ARA in the Atlantic.
No, again, but you need to, when you think about, let's say, more deferred like Q3, you need to think about Houston and ARA as a single place. You know, it's like it's the Atlantic basin, and in summer, depending on how high the stocks were in each region, then you will have like one is the cheapest than the other, and all that. You have that counterbalance, but at the end of the day, you end up the summer season with both of them very low in stocks. So if Houston is now the base supplier to Australia, but maybe next month it's ARA, etc. At the end, when you accumulate all of that, when you get into Q3, you don't have anything to offer.
Yeah, so it could be like a delay tightness on the whole Western gasoline market.
Yeah.
That's right now. Kind of, a July EWOB crack is at +22, August is at +20. These are not kind of ridiculous levels.
It's not huge. It's not crazy.
But then also April is still +23, right? We haven't even seen the prompt crack response yet. And just to put some numbers on it, I suppose in the last 24 hours, the TAR has lost 10 cents per gallon.
But again,
that's not just Jones operators, right? or even
talk about this forever, no? But I mean, an April crack right now, when you have ample supply in ARA, because we're only starting to see ARA supplying other regions, but you've had ample supply. Let's not forget, crude is now at 110 plus, so you need a little bit of catch up. For me, the trade is much more on the deferred cracks, where even if this stops in a week, you still have all of these arbs happening, all of the emptying the stocks at a faster pace and all that. So that's you if you don't want to be a sort of crack roll trade, if you don't want to have a net directional position, irrespectively of what happens and when this finishes, that there's going to be a lot of oil that will need to move from the west to the east, and that's the trade. But anyway, we could talk about this forever. And sorry, I got excited. Naphtha. What's going on with Naphtha?
Yeah. So Naphtha, well, the market keeps on the same trade. We are seeing new historical highs for FizzWest and for time spread. MobJ April-May is trading around plus 100 on the time spread. I have checked a minute ago, but it's moving with a very big volatility. And yesterday we had the attack on South Pars, as Neil has said. This impacts Naphtha through a condensate. It's one of the biggest outlet for condensate, the biggest produce center. So this is being felt into Naphtha already. Then we have a couple arbs that are counterbalancing the effect. They are not being enough, but we are seeing Russian volume picking up. We still have to wait until the end of March to see the full picture of March versus February, but it looks like imports are restarting into Taiwan, some into Korea. So it's going to be the highest volume exported by Russia of Naphtha since the last summer. And we keep seeing this trend with more waivers on Russian product and more need from the Eastern outlets to bring back this product. Yeah, then the big incentive from US and from Europe to export into Asia remains, and we keep seeing bigger margins for this, and already an uptake on the flows from Europe into Japan. So it has doubled already the volumes from February. So yeah, we were talking about the need of Asian petrochemical companies to get this naphtha, and we are seeing it on the arbs. As I said before, it's still not enough. So the increase in this arbitrage volume from Russia and from Europe and US is just marginal compared to the loss of supply that we have seen in AG. So I will expect that we will see more demand destruction. We have talked in many podcasts about the destruction of demand from the petrochemical companies, and we will keep seeing that. Then to combine both views on gas NAP, we talked in the beginning of the conflict, like 2-3 weeks ago, about a rally in gas naphtha that probably will likely reverse because because Naphtha being more impacted in the prompt. We are already seeing this. We've seen a correction of $30 per metric ton. Phil has talked about it, but it remains higher than before the attack for summer, which I think it makes sense with our previous story. So in the prompt, Naphtha is starting to take the lead in terms of more percentage of the global supply is being destructed than in gasoline. But in summer, we are still seeing higher gas nap values than previous to the attack.
No, and you know what? You were right. I mean, I didn't necessarily agree with your view last week, but my thinking here shifted a little bit in the sense that we haven't really tested demand destruction on diesel or gasoline because it's much more inelastic. Whereas with naphtha, these guys will say, sorry, I'm not producing at these levels, and we've seen that time and time again in the past. The impact will be seen in the second order, like, plastics, polyethylene, etc.
Exactly.
But in diesel and gasoline, people will still drive. It's costing me $40 extra. It's per month. Okay, well, that's a cup of coffee a day. So we haven't really seen that. Whereas with naphtha, you might see that quite significantly. If once again the whole wave, crude, flat price, everything goes up, at some point you will have that demand destruction. What is the level of demand destruction in gasoline and diesel? I don't know. Do you guys know? I have no idea what that flat price should be in order for the four of us to stop taking our car.
I have some thoughts on that, by the way. I think we should not even talk about that quite as much because you can already see that governments are preemptively doing things.
Yes.
Right? Before there's a real shortage where the pumps run dry, you have governments getting people to work less, the mobility going down and stuff like that. So we're almost already there. Of course, the price can go up and do more from the price perspective. The urgency for governments to actually prevent the panic of no fuel is already there, and it's only going to increase.
Yeah, and I think on the chemical side, there is another point that we are in the middle of a reconfiguration of the Asian steam cracker picture. So we are seeing a rationalization already in Korea and in Japan. So this adds more fuel to the ongoing trend. So the margins are low, you lose supply from naphtha. The first thing that you are going to make is to stop your cracker or stop supplying stop exporting chemical products and keep them locally. Whether in gasoline and diesel, you will have to stop the cars and the trucks, and then it will impact the refinery. So yeah, that's the picture. And then we can move into the freight. So the two biggest movements that we've seen on the clean freight, first, well, TC14 and TC15, they both have behaved in the same way. They have more than doubled since the beginning of the conflict. It makes sense. It keeps the same trend than is West. And this effort to bring more product from West into the East is impacting into this disease. Yeah. I would say that the change in this West has been bigger than the freight, so it's paying for this arbitrage to be open.
No, and if we use that theory of what's the limit, what is that demand destruction? If that is what you need to be looking at, that level, then theoretically, unless, as you say, Neil, the government measures are put in place drastically or draconianly, if you want, freight will be the bigger winner here at the end of the day, because the arbs will always open irrespective of what the freight is. What we think today is completely crazy, like, I don't know, $9 million for, $5 million last week was already crazy. And now $5 million is just cheap, you see, and it will continue going at that way until we hit that demand elasticity where people are saying, stop, okay, I had enough, and we don't really see that yet. Moving on to distillates. Phil, what can you tell us about the latest Asian fuel crunch?
So I think, as we were talking about before, kind of the US Gulf and India are basically kind of pricing or seen as these two big potential solvers at the moment. And if we're looking at kind of US Gulf Coast diesel arbs, at least, they are very much not open to basically anywhere right now, either Rotterdam or Singapore. But actually, if we look at it and we talk about what the East-West has done, the arb into Singapore is kind of the same netback as you would get on an arb into Rotterdam. And so what we're really seeing then in fixtures is people looking to put together arbs into Australia, for example, or into kind of demand centers across Asia, who would typically be feeding from Asian sources and are now having to scramble to find those. There was one kind of slightly interesting note that also of a Reliance cargo, or Reliance diesel barrels, which had reached ARA, but have now turned around and are heading to Singapore, that's not an economic move. It's not because the East-West is that wide, but it's because there is still this hesitancy within Europe to take those reliance barrels because they might run into the molecule ban issues. The issue, we can say kind of from that then at least that the issue in Europe doesn't seem to be too big. Otherwise, they'd be trying to they'd be taking those barrels regardless and trying to, figuring out the consequences later. If we look at somewhere like Yambu, let's assume that it is still operational. And they are able to load diesel. Those arbs point definitively east for the next quarter at least. So we still have negative deferred east-west. Yambu is certainly, the market is trying to pull even those barrels east. And this will eventually run into an issue of European resupply being completely shut off. And we will be drawing stocks very quickly in Europe now, or in the Atlantic Basin as a whole, potentially, depending on what happens in the Gulf Coast. I think if we look at the Atlantic Basin more generally, we see that the HOGO was very high and has now come off quite significantly, but there's not yet enough, I think, to open up those Gulf Coast to Rotterdam arbs on diesel, at least. So even with this now 8 cent per gallon move on the HOGO in the last 24 hours or so, it hasn't been quite enough, but maybe we're getting closer to opening that up. I think from here, it seems as though HOGO, you can probably only, let's take it a step back and say, if we think that there is the possibility for an export ban, then you can't be long HOGO. But there was a reason that the HOGO was high before, and it was because PAD 1 distillate PAD 1 and 2 distillate was looking very tight. That hasn't changed. So it's a very difficult scenario right now. Right? Politically, your potential policy impact, you need to be short HOGO. If you don't think that's coming in, then the HOGO will need to rise to kind of protect, again, both PAD 1 and PAD 5 market and make sure that those barrels that are now available to be moved on non-Jones Act vessels move. We're kind of all over the place, unfortunately.
By the way, talking about all over the place and a little bit of clarity, we will be adding freight, Joan.
Yes.
We changed the tool so that you can see all of the arbs within the US because obviously we didn't have that. And now that Jones Act has been waived, then now you will be able to see it. I think it's going to be 1 or 2 days from now.
Yeah.
So that at least you have a little bit of clarity, a little bit of publicity.
Probably on Monday we will have them.
Monday, okay, well, there you go. Probably by then Trump decides to cancel it, and then it's useless. But
yeah, we often end up doing those pieces of work, and then yeah.
Anything else on distillates, or should we move on to crude?
Just a very quick mention on jet. So we are already seeing flight cancellations in Europe. So those airlines which were less hedged than others are already starting to cancel flights. In this particular case, it's SAS, who were apparently.
But for any destination, or just for?
They've been cutting intra-European routes, so mostly kind of short haul stuff to begin with.
Neil, you seem to have something in your mind.
No, it's just crazy. That's all. It's just crazy.
Yeah. The Northwest European jet diff is still plus 430, right? It's doing its best. I think if you look at I think jet is currently priced something like $600-700 a ton over gasoline.
I mean, let's dwell into that because that's very interesting. Normally, an airline, the jet fuel cost for an airline as a whole is roughly 25-30% of their overall cost. Okay,
yeah. If
jet has now more than doubled. And you are not hedged or not fully hedged, it depends, it depends on the airline. Suddenly, everything that you've sold, because most people buy their tickets 3, 4, 5 months in advance, so you already sold all of that, then you're in deep trouble. And the airline business is not a very good business as a whole in general, in normal conditions. So this is quite scary, what you're just saying right now.
Yeah. So I think outright jet prices in Europe, we're looking at something like $1,700, I think, the last time I looked, $1,800 a ton, which is more than double where we were before the outbreak of this war.
I'm going to start asking Claude which airlines hedged the most and which didn't, and start shorting the ones that didn't. Anyway,
is your answer.
Crude, Neil. We talked about WTI-Brent. You had it here -15. Now it's already -20. We were already surprised. You want to give us more surprises? Or
Yeah, I'll give you one more surprise. I just got the headline through that the Saudi port of Yambu is stopping oil loadings, according to Reuters.
Really?
So No, that's another one as we are speaking. Yeah, so let's pick that up later. But obviously, if that's true and it's because of extended damage, then yeah, flat price is going to go up today for sure. That's another 3 million lost.
Sorry, I need to jump and go and do a webinar, but I think the proposed title for that webinar has just changed from whatever it was before to "We're all screwed." Basically, if Yambu's been hit, the sky is the limit.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, let me see you later, Phil. Apart from that, there's just really two major things I want to pick up on and talking about all over the place. It's new territory for me in certain senses, right? Because the fact is WTI is now minus 20 at the prompt, minus 15 for June. Obviously, even with high freight, TI is now by far the cheapest crude in the world that's available. So if you're looking at WTI versus WAF into the Far East, TI is landing at many, many dollars per barrel discounts. So if I was a Japanese refiner, and I had the choice between two light sweets, I'd be trying to take WTI. And that is actually what we begin to see now when we're looking at fixtures. It looks like TI flows to Asia are beginning to ramp up. I don't see it yet in the Brent-linked crude, but it's early days. But definitely the signal now is to massively max out TI flow to Asia. We probably won't see that in fixtures until next month, basis these prices. But the signal as things stand is that TI is ridiculously cheap crude. And it's true also in the North Sea. So TI is landing very cheaply into the North Sea. And I'm not quite sure what that means for something like the DFL or the Brent spread. Because now, in that situation, in normal times, I would say, well, that's an opportunity to short the Brent spread. But you can't do that in this situation, or I presume not. So I'm actually not quite sure how those two things will continue.
Are the Brent crudes, the physical, open anywhere? Do they have open arbs right now or not?
Define open, that's the thing, They can land into Asia. They're more expensive than WTI, but if I'm an Asian refiner and I'm going after barrels, obviously I want to pick up WTI at the moment, but maybe I want more WAF for quality purposes because WAF has slightly different qualities. I can get more distillate out of WAF. So no, Forties is not open, but it kind of like the definition of open is slightly changed just now. That's the problem as well. And we also saw the other part of this, and I'm not sure if it's related to the TI-Brent signal, the export ban signal. Particularly yesterday, the premiums for North Sea light sweets really shot up. So it was steadily creeping up the last week or two for the light sweets. But then yesterday they really shot up. So I wonder if it's the other side of the export ban trade, whereby there's an assumption that TI is kind of missing from Europe next month. It's a complete supposition, but maybe it's that. But on the other hand, it could also be the Europeans are just buying stuff up because they see that the disruption is going to be huge and it's not going to ease from Hormuz. Or it could be the Asians. It could be the Asians bidding heavily for North Sea grades. I just don't know. That's the thing. Sort of the standard doctrine would be to say, okay, we just get more of this because there's not enough crude in the world. And if the Asians are going to buy crude, they need to take everything they can get their hands on. But they have to bid against the Europeans, who are margin advantage now because the freight rate's much lower to get 40s into Europe and WAF. So I don't know where this whole thing lands now. And then you add in this new part of the equation where WTI now lands everywhere extremely cheaply. I just don't know what to say, to be perfectly honest. It's just all over the place.
So, I mean, the story is it cheap or is everyone else expensive? No, and definitely, I don't know. I mean, this is where, we don't pretend that we know everything at all. No, that's for sure. But it's the story here is that it's just the cheapest source right now. Everyone should be scoping that as soon as possible. And how do you hedge it against what? That's that's the difficult part of the equation. It's do you sell Brent? Do you sell Dubai? I don't know. Spreads, cracks. But you want to have that oil, that's for sure.
Yeah. And at some point, one definite thing is that as you guys have been talking about, the deferred cracks, the deferred margins look too low. So we've been saying that for a couple of weeks, and also from the crude procurement perspective, that looks to be true. Because even in Europe, the sort of June, July margin on local crudes isn't even that good. So if I'm looking at just short haul barrels, I want the margin to be higher. And there's also moving parts that we haven't really discussed yet, like the price of natural gas has just doubled in a couple of weeks. And that feeds through to the refiner margin as well in different ways. So I don't know how this thing gets solved, but a couple of things. TI looks very, very cheap. Margins look too low. And maybe there's just going to be a lot of disconnect between premiums on different sides of the Atlantic for a while.
We could go on and on, but I think this is enough for today. And thanks, guys. Really appreciate all the effort. And I think we maybe need to do another emergency one on Monday, because this is escalating to the point that I would not be surprised that we start hearing something over the weekend in terms of, I'm not saying an official off-ramp, but at least some discussions around that. We're getting to that point, I would say. We're getting to that point. Anyway, thanks, guys.
Thank you.